Are there any declarations of interest, please?
I see no hands, Chair.
Thank you. Regarding item number 5, we do have apologies from Councillor Helen Kerry-Clark, leader of the Coed Frank Liberal and Green Group. She sent her apologies as she is unable to attend today. And may I remind you all that your mobile phones should be switched off. Thank you. First of all, item 3 is our forward work programme. Craig, would you like to comment on that, please?
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So the forward work programme is obviously just for noting at this stage. One of the items you're going to see later on in your papers will be the Standards Committee annual report, and as part of that, I've included some additional priorities ultimately that the Standards Committee could look at over the course of the next year. So following approval of that document, hopefully today, I can go back and update your forward work programme to make sure that all of those elements are programmed in. One of the suggestions, and the Chairman and I have spoken about previously, maybe is after our next meeting, a sort of workshop where we can just have a general discussion amongst Standards Committee members to try and programme in any additional items the members would like to see as part of the forward work programme as well, so we can have a more of a definitive version brought to your next committee meeting at that point, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig, and I'm sure we'll have a very interesting programme of work ahead of us for the next municipal year. Thank you, Tammy. Welcome, Duncan.
Morning.
Morning.
Apologies.
Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. May I have your approval for those minutes, please? Approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item is number 4, the group leader invitation. Craig, would you like to introduce this item, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So as members will have heard me mentioning previously, the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021 brought about some new changes in respect of the role of the Standards Committee. And one of the new duties that they've created is an obligation for the Standards Committee to work with group leaders to look at how they can ultimately promote standards functions within their political groups. And conversely, then there's a similar obligation on group leaders to take steps to promote those standards ultimately within the group. So what the Standards Committee decided back last year is for year 1 of the new administration, we would invite group leaders to attend the Standards Committee with a series of set questions in order for those introductions to be made and to then perhaps have some understanding about how that particular group leader promotes standards within their group, and what we then as a Standards Committee can do then to try and support that group leader with their duties. So attendance at the meeting today is Councillor Martin Peters. Councillor Martin Peters is the leader of the Dufferin Independent Group and also the Cabinet Member for the Economy and Regeneration Services within the Council. So, Chair, I think that gives a very basic introduction, and happy to hand over to yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, over to you, Councillor Peters, and you've had the questions in advance. I won't go through them. And please relax, although it is the Standards Committee. We're here to have a dialogue, as you've heard from Craig, with all of the group leaders, and it's proved a very positive experience, certainly for us so far. So please, take your time, just go through the questions and answer. There's no time limit on it. You're not restricted in any way, but it will be good to hear your views on those questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me here, actually. Nice to be here. First question A. Introduce myself. I'm Councillor Martin Peters. I'm a member of the Dufferin Ward in the Neath area. I've been a county borough member now for 24 years, so I've been a member of this authority for 24 years, so probably one of the longest serving. I've been the leader of the group 2 of us actually, who started in the Dufferin Ward. So I've been the leader of the group for roughly 10 months since the last election. I formerly, before that, I was a member of Plaid Cymru up until about 3 years ago, where I left for various reasons, and I sat as an independent for that time. So that's where I am. So roughly, yes, county borough member for 24 years, but a group leader for roughly 10 months.
Good, thank you very much. Got lots of experience then over 24 years.
Well, yes, we're going to add a bit of wit to it. For the last 3 years, I sat in isolation. Nobody spoke to me. 3 years up the back. but after the election, the way it panned out, I think everybody wanted to speak to me. So, so that's where we are.
Well, it's good to work together, isn't it? Yep. Your next question is about the code of conduct and how appropriate you think it is. So
well, obviously, a code of conduct is paramount to a council work, and isn't it, for behaviour of people who've got to have a code of conduct. I'm lucky, really, that over the years I work with many councillors who are behaved and without a code of conduct. I just wonder where we would be. We should be setting standards right across for our residents to look at. So if we can't behave properly, how the heck do we expect society to work properly? So that's the way I see that. So I think it's paramount that we have a code of conduct. Of course it is, yes. Yeah. Want we move on to number C?
yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I try to promote high standards, Chair, within our political group of two, albeit the different independent group also run the local community council where they took all seats at the last election. So it's working two councils really, and I tend to lead them as the member has been for many, many years. So yes, try to promote high standards. I think it's general, and James, who is my fellow ward councillor, is quite a lot younger than me, obviously, young enough to be my grandson, but he's very active and he wants to learn a lot. So yes, I think we try to promote high standards amongst ourselves within the council and outside in the community in general. Yes, so I think that's just to answer that one, hopefully. If I go on to number D, I understand the role of the Standards Committee. I do understand it, roughly the role of it. I have been involved with it once or twice over the years, not for really bad things, but I have been involved with it. So I do understand the role of the Standards Committee, that if you misbehave yourself, so to speak, you can certainly be in amongst you people. I'll have a smack across the palm of the hand. So I do totally understand that, and yeah, I think it's a good thing. I haven't had it myself, but smack across the arm, but I think I've been near to it once or twice. So that's where we are. If I could move on, and I don't feel there's any work the Standards Committee should be undertaking necessarily over the year. I think you've pretty well got it all around you. It's pretty good, really. I feel, I think we tend to work together. I have spoke to Craig once or twice over issues over the last 2 years, maybe, Craig. But over than that, I'm pretty happy with everything that works. I take advice of Craig. The advice is given and hopefully taken in the spirit that it's given, and we move on. Yeah, that's fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. How can the Standards Committee become more active in promoting ethical conduct? Very difficult one, really, isn't it? I think you're doing it. I mean, this is the first time I had never been a group leader before, so I wouldn't have been in front of the Standards Committee in this respect. So I don't know if you've held these in the past. I was reading, earlier on that this is something that's been brought in now, isn't it?
This year, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's fine. I think we should do this. It's probably the first time that this council has had so many group leaders, I suppose. I haven't had so many, but I believe it's right and proper that we should have these and see how things work. To benefit society, benefit the electors that we represent and the taxpayers, the council taxpayers. So yeah, that's fine with that. Yeah. If I go on to G, politicians with thick skin, yes. I believe they should have a thick skin. It's cut and thrusted, and a lot of it is given in good fun and wit, I believe. Some people do take certain things personal. It's best not to. I do, once it gets personal, I think then it's got to be stopped. But in the political field, it is what it is, isn't it? And you deal with that. some people can go overboard, especially in the modern day with social media, where they write certain things. I've had lessons of that, and I tend to keep away from it completely myself. You will never see anything on social media from me. I tend to keep away from it. It's a good thing and a bad thing, really, isn't it? That type of thing. But in general, yeah, I think the cut and thrust of politics, as I say, I've been around a long time now, so I've probably got the knives in my back and walked away. But I think we should have a thick skin, and if things kept the way they were, without the social media bickering and that type of thing and name calling, I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, it's fine. What are my views on the authorities' code of conduct training? I think it's fine. Extremely good, I believe. I think, it's all working out. Yeah, it's fine. And also the training for councillors, co-opted members. Well, it's you people, really, isn't it? I mean, I think that's fine. Training for councillors is important, especially for newly elected ones. I certainly believe that, and some older guards like me, I suppose, as well, because you tend to do things that you used to do, and say things that you used to say, and you shouldn't be saying them now. I think it's a case of sending some of us back to school, and what they say, stop the 70s talk. A type of thing, but yes, I think it's fine, and I think at the moment with this council, it's working out. The balance is working out. I think with so many groups have got to work together, where they used to bicker amongst each other. It's a case now where the election have thrown people together, and I've been part of that, and I see it worked out fine. And what you found is what you thought people were like, wasn't like that at all. When you've got to work together, it works. And that's what I've noticed anyway. So I think that's fine. But training is important, obviously. I mean, training, you've been put into a position where you represent people. People expect you to act properly and have the proper training, like you would in any skill. You need training for any skill, don't you? And I think this is most important. Yeah, I think so. And the authorities' local resolution to sort out conflicts between two councillors. Well, as Craig, I'll come back to Craig again, as Craig, it was happening to me a couple of years ago, and Craig put that to me to sort it out in this way. I decided against it because I thought it wasn't worth the effort, and it might have led to more bad feeling. So I decided against it, which was quite acceptable. And I think overall that way worked. Keep away from it. Don't get involved. Don't answer things back. And it seemed to work for me. But of course, for others, maybe this is the way to sort it out. I think it's up to the individual or the individual problem that's arising, I believe. So I think it's a good way to sort it before it gets out of hand. If two people are not mature enough to sort it out, it'll get out of hand and then probably end up in further places. So I think it's a good idea to sort it out that way. Yeah, I think that's about it, really.
Okay.
Happy with the rest of it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that contribution. I'm sure members of the committee will have some questions for you. So I shall open it up to questions and or observations while you're all thinking about it. Perhaps I'll kick off with a first question. Just talking about the role of the Standards Committee, interested to see your take on it, which was that if councillors misbehave, it's an issue for the Standards Committee, which of course it is. But one of the things that the Standards Committee wants to do is to actually educate, if I can use that word, councillors as to the wider role of the Standards Committee. And this is part of the process in having the group leaders, that is more than about dealing with issues of misbehaviour, to use your words. It is about working with councillors to raise standards and to improve things, conduct, behaviour, whatever, not just within the council, but also, of course, within the community councils as well. So just wanted to make that point, and perhaps that's something that you might think about, particularly as you've got a role on the community council as well. It's about how the standards committee can work with the elected members towards that common aim of maintaining and sustaining good behaviour in the democratic process. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I do actually. I'm glad you mentioned the role with the community councils as well, which is a bit more difficult to deal with on the county borough. They haven't got the resources, got a clerk to work with. Sometimes they're not up to speed on running on things, or people generally who have never been involved with anything before and get elected to community councils. And I'll come back on that where they go off and one, and I'll come back to my pet thing is social media, where things are said on social media, which they shouldn't be saying, where they could easily end up in front of you people, even from community council. And I think that is a thing that people need to get across, not only to the county borough members who have all the support, but some community councillors don't understand that. And I think the main thing that's in here is training. You really need training, especially for newcomers who perhaps wants to go further in this. James, who's county borough member, he's 24 years of age, and he's really wants to go places. So for people like that, I think it's paramount that they have the training. They listen to you people. They possibly they need to come in front here as well, and say what they've got to say, and listen to what you've got to say as well. Yeah, I think that's about right. But I have got concerns over community council. I've been a member for community. I say things. I've been standing for elections for 49 years now, so it's a long time. 50 years next year. So I've been on the community council for many years, and you see people come and go, but some of them go, and you think, what the hell have they said? What have they done? Type of thing. So, yeah, I think training and standards committee is paramount.
Yeah. Given that you are a long-standing member, 50 years, that's a long time to be involved with a community council. Do you feel able to challenge any behaviour and to act as those words of wisdom then for these younger people or inexperienced people coming through?
Well, yes, I believe so. I believe, but of course, coming from that long ago, you're in a different age, really, aren't you? And the younger people and people who are a lot sharper than me with the social media, I always come back to that. Social media do things totally different. They think differently. I'm from the old school where you walk the ward and you go through and you meet people calling somebody's house. Well, of course, it's all done on Facebook, and so that's the way I work, and I understand things have changed. They've totally changed. Where you got instant access to people and they have to you now. So that's totally changed. But wisdom from people, I think, goes a long way. Especially like you people, look at the wisdom you people have got, and nobody wants to end up in front of you for bad behaviour. So I think that is a good point. Yeah.
Any questions? Tammy, has anybody got their hand up?
Yes, Chair. Duncan Lewis
Duncan.
has his hand up.
Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies once again for my late arrival. The technological gremlins got me this morning and decided to do an update on my computer just as I was about to log on. So apologies for that. Martin, thank you for your explanation to the questions, your answers. I have a question really. As there's only two of you, yourself and James, what would be your process if, let's say, a complaint, talking hypothetically here, of course, a complaint was made about James's behaviour? Given there's only two of you, who do you seek guidance and advice from as to how to address that behaviour?
Thank you for that, Duncan. Well, obviously, you try to sort it amongst yourself. As I said earlier on, James is young, but he's quite shrewd, and I have had a few words with him about social media things, but obviously then we probably come to somebody like Craig if it's causing a problem outside the ward or with other councillors. That's where we'd seek advice. I would seek advice anyway, and I've always found that the advice I've received, not on issues with James, but other things that we've had within the community council actually has been very good, and we take that back, and it's usually been sorted. You know, it doesn't go any further. So yes, I would seek advice of the monitoring officer and the professionals on that. That's where I would go, definitely.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, you know, I'd possibly extend the range of support available to also think about the standards committee and whether or not we could provide some assistance, particularly, you know, if something is more difficult to tackle, or you just simply wanted to raise an issue and get some counsel from us as a standards committee. I think that's something we probably welcome. Quite often, you know, I served for 2 terms with South Wales Police's Ethics Committee. That there's a lot of, as you've already identified, Martin, a lot of, you know, wisdom around the table, both within the political groups, but also within the Standards Committee. So I think just bear that in mind, that this is something that we don't want to be seen just simply as a regulatory body, to use your phrase, you know, slap people on the wrist with a ruler. We're here to counsel and advise and to assist. So just bear that in mind.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Yeah, if I just jump in one. Martin, thank you for your very practical and realistic views on your service. Would you see a benefit in perhaps members of the committee coming to attend your community council or council meetings?
Short answer for that, yes, definitely. The members of the community council at the moment, there's only 13 members of the community council. Only 2 have been there before, or 11 out of the 13 are totally new. Never been involved in anything like that. They all stood, of the 13, 11 stood as different independents and 2 didn't. Bearing in mind, one of the other 2 is vastly experienced from outside that community council, so he is vastly experienced. But certainly, the community council I am representing at the moment would benefit from that, because we have run into problems this year, albeit from the lockdown. There's a lot of things in there that I think, you know, I wouldn't say in here, but we haven't been operating as the way we should, although these people are trying their best, but very inexperienced. So we would definitely, and some of the standards of some of them, or the behaviour, well, not all of them, few of them is left, you know, let to be. Well, I've been involved with political parties in the past, and of course, political parties put them in the line in some respect. When all these people are now independents, although belonging to a group of independents, 1 or 2 of them do step out of line quite a bit, and I'll come back to my old favourite, social media, which causes the problem. And you know, when I speak to them about it, I say, you could say something, and even if you said it wrong, you could say, well, I didn't say it quite like that. When you put it down, you're in deep trouble, aren't you? And you know, it's there forever, especially on this stuff. So that is my major concern, but not only with the community council I represent. I think it's right across the board in all standards, in all life. I really believe that, because I read some of the things that people write on Wales online, and I can't believe what these people are capable of writing. You know, they don't pull. If you wrote a letter to the editor, like some of they are saying, you're in deep water, aren't you? So yes, definitely. I can't speak for other community council, but the one I represent, we could do with a visit from you people, yes, certainly.
And perhaps if that member were to attend them, prepare some sort of overall independent view of what went on, and perhaps could flag up certain issues that may need to be addressed. I think that would help everybody then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Be all in favour of that. And as I said, I mean, I can only speak for the one I represent, but I would imagine most community councils will have a few people like that about them, which we would all benefit from it. But, you know, I don't know what really happens in them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Sarah Thomas, Chair.
Sorry, could I just jump in there just to ask, do you know if all your members, all the members on the community council have had the training, taken part in training?
be fair, most of them wanted training. We had a bit of a problem then with the clerk, and because I worked with this clerk for 25 years, so I'm very fond of him and he's a gentleman. But yet again, couldn't keep up with the modern day with the technology we're using. Like myself, really, although I'm a lot better in them and I'm hopeless. So with that type of thing, so the training then wasn't set up, and things that was asked to be done wasn't done. So it compounded the problem we were having then. So yes, definitely, yeah.
Sarah, my apologies, I jumped in there.
That's quite all right, Chair. And as usual, you were thinking along the same lines as me. What I was going to say, though, is that you seem to talk about social media quite a lot. I mean, how would you handle a situation on social media then? And whether it be, are you chair of your community council?
No, I'm not the chair. No.
Okay, so I mean, I assume you're group leader for the independents at the community council. So that obviously makes the group a bit bigger than just two of you. And what I'm wondering is, like, if there was an issue on social media, how would you deal with that? So is it something that, again, you would seek Craig's advice on, or?
Yes, we try to deal with it internally. That's the best way to solve the problem. I've always thought most of the time it works. I got to be totally honest here. I have seek Craig's advice on some of it, some of the behaviour in the very early days of the community council, back probably May or June of last year, which was then taken back to the community council advice, and it seems to have sorted the problem of most of the time, but not all of the time. And I tend to believe that some people, without training, without thinking, can end up in not only getting themselves into trouble, but the community in trouble, really. And there's a few more issues I would go into, but I wouldn't dare to go into here. But there are issues, I believe, with social media, and I think the training, myself, as I said, I don't use it. I learned lessons of that through other people. I understand it's a very good tool to use to get information. The bus is not running tomorrow, or the bin service is a day late for whatever reason. I understand it's very good for that type of thing. But when you go into other things and personal stuff about people, I think you've got to be very, very careful of that. And I think at this moment in time, like I feel it's out of control with certain people. They can say and do as they like. When they're elected representatives, albeit to a community council, they got to understand that they are different to everybody else, and they've got standards to adhere to. And that's what I think anyway. So I think, coming back to what you said, yes, I am the more or less the leader of the group. I formed them, put them together, but certainly the individuals who also got elected wasn't part of that group, and so but they part of the community council. So within the group, and I've got more or less that is more or less sorted now. They had more on a smack across the wrist, let's put it that way. But that's the way I feel. Yeah.
So can I come back in, Chair?
Sorry, yes, Sarah, do.
Thank you. So I mean, with One Voice Wales, is your council a member of One Voice Wales? Because I know they've got a module all about social media and internet and IT and so on, and perhaps that might be a good idea if people are struggling with that, because I think they cover the sort of the political angle of it rather than just using it. But I seem to recall having some pretty good training on this a while back. I'll have a look and see if I can dig it out, who provided it, and pass it on. But what about technology itself? Is that a problem? So, because obviously I'm on a community council as well, and we have to basically have our meetings online, because you either have to be online or you have to be a hybrid under the new rules, and it's difficult for us to afford the kit for us to be hybrid, so we have to be online. Does that cause problems for you and your colleagues, and how do you manage that as a group leader? Okay,
well, I got to say that I would say all of them are better on social media than I am. Let's put it that way. I would say that. We are moving into the hybrid system that you were talking about. Most of them have been on a course with One Voice Wales about social media. After the initial problems we had, that was really laid down, that they've got to go on these courses. So that was done, and within the next few months, we are moving with the community centre where we do meet as a group once a month. But we are moving forward where money is being put aside now to set up the community centre, 2 committee rooms where all the material for hybrid working will be put in. So we've already seen about that. It's been dealt with where money's been put aside. And I believe we'll be getting a grant also towards it. So hopefully be one of the, coming from probably the least, I would say, modern technology, we be probably at the forefront probably by this time next year, hopefully. So that's where we're headed. All that has been talked about, it's been passed, and that's where we move into, definitely. Yeah. Totally understand that is the way forward, although I'm very reluctant to move myself forward. Does that answer the question?
It does indeed. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions, observations, Craig? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Martin. Very helpful and informative insight you've given us this morning. Some very common themes, I think, from all the group leaders that we hear about. Social media seems to be ever present in people's thoughts, and how to tackle that and how to manage that. And I think the mantra of, well, if you wouldn't speak it, then don't write it. And I think that's a very important thing for people to perhaps bear in mind. Pleased to hear that you'd welcome a visit from the Community Council. We've been discussing that as part of the forward work programme for the Standards Committee. So the Standards Committee members will be coming out and about to make those observations, and also to meet the people on the community councils, because obviously as a Standards Committee we might come across the councillors here in the county borough, but of course we don't maybe have the same opportunity to meet the community council. So I think that's going to be really worthwhile experience, and I hope the community councils will also see it as beneficial to them too. Pleased to hear that you're a strong advocate of training. As you rightly say, training is all about raising people's skills, and without that one can't do one's job or one's role as well as one could be. And as always, Craig is the first point of contact for any queries with regard to code of conduct. And of course, through him, he would naturally draw upon the Standards Committee if and when's needed. So that direct approach to Craig, and he's obviously very knowledgeable about the members on the committee, and so on and so forth. So yes, I'm sure we can support you in any way that we can. And we say that same message to all of the group leaders, because that's what we're here to do, is to support and help to raise standards, and also be a sounding board for different issues. I say, obviously going through Craig, so he has a handle on everything that's coming through from councils, community councils, or from members. So thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. You're very, very welcome to stay. Appreciate you're busy, but absolutely please stay if you want. And staying, is part of the education process as to what the work of the Standards Committee is. But if you've got commitments, then please do feel free to go. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Wasn't too bad, was it? Right. Next item is item number 6, group leaders' duties. Craig, would you like to take that, please?
Of course, thank you very much, Chair. So this is probably a natural follow-up to the group leader invitation that we were just speaking about, and the work that Councillor Peters obviously was referencing there. So when we had this new duty that was imposed on us back last year, we decided that in the first instance, we would look to bring individual group leaders to our meetings to give you the opportunity to get to know them and, and find out about some of the approaches that they adopt when they promote standards ultimately within their group. But obviously now we've come to the end of that first cycle, subject to Councillor Clark, who will appear before our next meeting, hopefully. So it's looking at different options as to how we want to discharge that duty going forward. And there's been some discussions among some monitoring officer colleagues of mine, and try to find out about different processes that other authorities seem to be adopting. And the way in which there seems to be a direction of travel at the moment is that a sort of an annual report will be prepared by each individual group leader using the format which I've included in your papers at Appendix 1, which sets out the approaches they ultimately take when they look to promote standards. And the proposal then would be that those reports are submitted back to the Standards Committee, and you would meet then with those individual group leaders to talk about how you work and how you can work with them, obviously, to continue to promote those level of standards. So rather than monopolise your agendas going forward and your 4 or 5 meetings every year with having the group leaders ultimately attending, we would then just try to have one meeting with all of them present. We have the individual reports and we use it then as that discussion forum as to how collaboratively we can work to be able to address the group leader duties and what more then as a standards committee we can do to try and support. It is only a sort of an indicative example at present. So if as a standards committee you would like us to explore some alternative methods as well, we've certainly got forums in which we can do that. But the report then and template at Appendix 1 will just show you the type of matters that we will be looking to gather. So, for example, I would gather information about the nature of various complaints maybe that have been had and various matters, and I can present them ultimately to group leaders. I do that throughout the year anyway, but this will be one way just to bring it together into one overarching document. We'll be able to identify if there are any issues with training as opposed to with individual members. And then looking at the specific matters which are included in their sort of guidance notes which we've issued, which have been sort of stemming from Welsh Government involvement, we'll ask them to explain, well, what more do they do? So in essence, the questions that they've been answering when they've been before you in the various meetings, they'll be then documenting to explain those processes, and we'll be able to bring it all together then into one annual report going forward. So that would be a proposal I'd put to the Standards Committee, but happy for any alternatives that members may wish to promote or any additional ideas you'd like to add, and happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions on that item, Alison?
Yeah, can I just ask, Craig, I'm looking at the template and I can see that you've got a number of members and those numbers trained on the code. What measures are going to be in place for those who don't attend the training? Because I think it's essential people should.
As it stands at the moment, we're in a fortunate position that with the County Borough Council, all 60 members have had that training. So that is a positive ultimately we can take forward in that regard. Sorry, just to reiterate that, my microphone went off then. All 60 members of Neath Talbot Council have had that training, so we should be able to mark that up. If it's the case that a member hasn't had that training, for example, they've been newly elected or there's an issue in that regard, they will have bespoke personal training with myself where I offer individual sessions, obviously to take forward some of these issues. Hopefully then we'll be able to address any individual aspects. There's nothing actually compelling a member to say they have to have training though at this stage, which is always a sort of an interesting discussion to be had, that we can't compel somebody to undertake that training. But what it can be used is if training has been offered and then not taken up, and that member is then brought before the Standards Committee, it could actually be an aggravating factor, which you would use then to determine what sanction ultimately you wish to impose if that member is guilty of a breach of the Code of Conduct. But hopefully we can try and address those issues before we get to it, because the majority of members do see training as quite an important factor for them.
And hopefully part of this process will be around the group leaders actively encouraging members to take up training. We're fortunate that we're not in that position at the moment, but going forward, it is part of a leader's role to ensure that members of the group do actually participate in this very important training. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So I was wondering, so I saw mentioned that it should be repeated annually, and I feel a little bit like, maybe it's just because I'm exposed to it a lot more being on the Standards Committee, but I feel a little bit like annually is quite frequent if nothing's changed. Is it really necessary for annual refreshers, or would perhaps a sort of 2 or 3 year cycle make more sense? I'm also conscious this is probably going to take up an awful lot of your time, Craig.
Absolutely. I take your point there, Councillor Thomas. I think the guidance ultimately that we're seeing from Welsh Government is this is an ongoing duty. So ultimately, it's up to the Standards Committee to ensure that you are getting reasonable assurances that these issues are being taken into account. So my advice would be annually is probably the longest ultimately we should go for in this regard. You may decide you want it to be biannually. Obviously, every 6 months I bring these reports back. But I think in the first instance, annually may give you that assumption, which we can review then on an annual basis as to whether you wish to have more frequent reporting or not to help you fulfill that duty. I wouldn't suggest doing things much at greater gaps ultimately than just the 1 year, because things can change obviously during the period. Different matters are ongoing, and I think as a Standards Committee you need to get that assurance that these things are ongoing and living and breathing ultimately within the political groups, and Standards is being given the sort of focus it deserves and what it should be having at this particular time. So I would still encourage annually at this instance.
Sorry, we might be on crossed wires here. I didn't mean the report to the Standards Committee. I meant the training. My understanding was that the code of conduct training to councillors is going to be repeated annually. Is that wrong?
No, my apologies.
Oh.
You're absolutely right. I am going to be doing it annually. I think refreshers are essential. And I think particularly as we are still in the early stages of an administration, sometimes a member may not grasp a lot of the issues within the Code of Conduct until they've been living and breathing as a councillor for a year and understand the various different issues. So I think an annual refresher course, it's 2 hours out of my day and out of my calendar, but I think it does have quite a significant impact in the way in which we deliver it. And sometimes I will do other sessions throughout the year as well on various matters, but making sure that we can afford that opportunity to county borough councillors, that they have this opportunity for ongoing training, to me seems quite a sort of a good process in which to follow.
Thank you.
And just if I could comment on that, I think that investment in that refresher training is likely to prevent things happening, because I think we had a discussion at our last meeting when Councillor Steve Hunt was here, no, Rob Jones, talking about the Code of Conduct itself. There's the loss of quite sort of complicated, complex language in that. It has to be like that because it has to set out certain things and it has to be conveyed. But actually, for most of us, actually assimilating all that information all at once can be quite difficult. But that regular update, I think, helps to reinforce the content of it in a user-friendly way, if I can put it that way. Yeah. So, Carolyn.
Thank you. Excuse me. Yes, just to clarify that a little bit further, please. So the community councils, I think it's quite difficult to get 10 or, as Martin said, 30 members together to access training. Would Craig then advise community councillors to have initial training when they are newly elected and then annually, or, you know, as we say, just refresh and keep reminding people about the standards and the code of conduct that they must maintain? Thank you.
I think you're right, Councillor Edwards. I think training has to be ongoing, and self-evaluation, self-learning and development opportunities need to be sort of embedded in training programmes ultimately within both the County Borough Council and the community councils as well. I often take the view that you have a newly elected member and they undertake their code of conduct training. They understand the basics going forward, but until they are actually out and about in the community, engaging with the general public in council meetings where they see the various aspects that they need to consider, it doesn't become part of their overarching consideration. So I think that's where, if we can get some initial training at the first stage to make sure that people are aware of the obligations that they need to follow and what these principles are, ongoing training, so whether that be annual refreshers or whatever the case may be, need to then obviously factor in then some of the training elements going forward, and we can try and find ways to embed it more in the delivery of their various responsibilities and duties. So by way of example, I've got some training sessions now tied up with the community councillors. We have 3 options throughout May, a morning, an afternoon and an evening course, which are open to all town and community councils, where I'll talk a little bit about code of conduct and embed some of those issues. So it's a free course. There'd be no obligation for authorities to have to pay One Voice Wales or any other organisations for it. And hopefully we can just get across some of the key messages in respect to standards at that point.
Thank you.
Any other questions, observations? Oh, thank you, Craig. I do think the template that you've produced is going to be very helpful. I like it. I think that it's going to be really valuable for the Standards Committee. And I think that annual report from the group leaders will encourage that self-reflection on what's gone on over the past year and what more members can do to self-regulate, if I can put it that way, their own behaviour within their political groups. And again, in the spirit of improvement, I think we'll learn as we go along in terms of what else we might need to add to this. But it is about ensuring that this self-reflection, analysis of what's been going on, and thinking about what more people can do to improve it is something that's going to be mainstreamed, I think, is the buzzword of the moment. It'll just be a matter of course that people do it on an annual and regular basis. So we'll see what happens. Oh, sorry, Wayne, I do apologise. I didn't see your hand.
Not a problem, Chair. I'm having massive problems with Wi-Fi this morning. Sorry about that. I've had to drop in and out. Just a question to Craig, really. Are school governors subject to a code of conduct, Craig?
Put me on the spot there, Councillor Carpenter. I believe there are obligations ultimately they need to follow. I'm not aware of the specific details on what their code ultimately would be in their various aspects. But if you leave that one with me, I will speak to our sort of school governors team in education and I'll get you an answer specifically on that one.
It's just that I see things that give me concern.
Is that for governors who are not councillors?
All governors, really,
All governors,
but
okay.
particularly governors who are councillors, in terms of choice of chairmanship and vice chairmanship. I've spoken to the education department and there are certain things that should not be happening but are happening, if I can put it that way, without going into specifics. But it does give me concern.
I expect, Craig, that councillors would be subject to the code of conduct anyway, regardless of their roles, wouldn't they? Whether they're a school governor, a councillor, whether they're acting in the community or whatever, they're still governed by that code of conduct, aren't they?
Yeah, yes, Chair, that's absolutely right. So one of the obligations within the councillor's code of conduct is that you will be acting as a councillor in various different forums, irrespective of whether you are there officially as a councillor. So there's an obligation not to place the councillor into disrepute, an obligation to make sure whether you're acting fairly, treating people equally, etc. And a lot of the basic Northern principles, as what we know them, are embedded in all actions that people undertake. But it is a very interesting point. Our school governors were not county borough councillors under a specific code of conduct. I know there are obligations, but I will find out that answer for you, Councillor Carpenter, and I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you, Craig, very much. My concerns are mainly county borough governors rather than parent governors or community governors. Yeah, we'll speak again. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Wayne.
No problem.
I think we had did we have a formal recommendation to approve? So our recommendation is that basically we approve of the template that's been proposed. And should anybody have any suggestions as to what could be added to it, perhaps they could let Craig know in due course. Yeah, thank you very much. Do we have your approval for the template? Yes, thank you. Thank you. The next item is our annual report. Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. Again, so this is a new obligation that's ultimately come out of the 2021 Act, and there's a requirement for the Standards Committee to now produce a formal annual report, which will be taken to our full council meeting for noting and adoption. It's something that we did start to look at a couple of years ago, but then I think of COVID became involved, and some of our meetings obviously had to take on a different element. So we deferred consideration and the implementation of this until the new legislation came in, because we would be able to see then specifically what we needed to take into account. So the report is before members today for the Standards Committee to note, to discuss, and hopefully adopt then, at which point it will be referred on to the full council for them to consider. So the report itself has to include a number of different factors. It will give some detail as to how the Standards Committee have discharged its functions during the preceding financial year. So basically the types of matters that you will have considered over the previous year, including a summary of reports and recommendations made by the Standards Committee in respect of any public service ombudsman issues which have been referred to it. Fortunately, over the past year, we haven't had any referrals made to the Standards Committee, so we haven't got to worry about making any recommendations. And you'll see as I'll come onto the report in due course and as to different elements that we can consider. We must include a summary of notices given to the Standards Committee by the Adjudication Panel for Wales. Again, in a fortunate position, we haven't had any matters referred to us in the past year. Included the Standards Committee's assessment of how political group leaders have complied with their new duty to promote high standards of conduct. So again, the manner in which we've approached it during the past year in making sure that as a Standards Committee, we've helped to address that duty. So the report itself is before you for consideration. I've structured it in a certain way and I'll talk you through then the type of matters we've considered there. So I've started with just the 10 general principles of public life, the Northern Standards, which we then obviously embed in the manner in which we promote our work here within the Standards Committee, and what county borough councils are under an obligation to which to consider. A quick overview of the legislation, which I just mentioned, which will tell us about the type of matters ultimately we need to be considering and in this annual report. Our chair's forward, obviously introducing the report and explaining how we've approached matters over the course of the last year. The members of our Standards Committee, just a quick narrative then as to who's been appointed and the tenure in which they serve. We have the remit of the Standards Committee, which is taken from the Neath Talbot Council's constitution, which is very much then the legislative obligations that we have to satisfy as a Standards Committee and what your roles ultimately would be. I've done a very brief overview as to all of the matters ultimately that you will have considered throughout 2022 and 23, and the types of discussions that we've had within our Standards Committee, and some of the general principles ultimately that have been sort of ongoing throughout the last year, particularly stemming from the local government elections that took place in May 2022, and the need then obviously to assess various dispensations and to make sure that members were fully aware of their issues in respect of interests, and making sure then that they had the necessary safeguards in place to enable them to continue to participate in decision-making processes. We've had a section then on the group leader duties, which explains the types of duties that need to be considered, and then how you have gone about then discharging that duty. And the suggestion at the end of that is that group leaders have discharged their duty over the course of the past year, and there were no ethical concerns maybe arising from the Standards Committee which have identified any recommendations of additional matters that you need to put into account, and you will be continue to monitoring this then as we go forward. Just on the subject of complaints, again, I'm grateful to say that we haven't actually had any referrals to us as a Standards Committee. There have been some instances where individual matters have been referred to the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales, but they've decided with those particular complaints either that they had no basis or that they were not matters that they would wish to investigate at this point. So that's a positive news that we haven't had anything ultimately referred to us. Similarly then as well on the local resolution processes, which we'll come on to talk about in our next report, I'm pleased to confirm that no cases have been referred to the hearings panel or for any informal mediation at this point. So hopefully over the course of the last year, we've seen positive working relationships between members that have meant we've not need to worry about implementing of those requirements. So before then in your 2023-2024 programme, I've tried to suggest some future priorities ultimately that you may wish to give consideration ultimately to picking up on some of the themes that we've spoken about over the last year. And what I would propose to do then is embed these into a forward work programme for you so we can work out how would be the best way to take this forward. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting as well, I'd look to hold an informal workshop with you collectively as members to talk about any other particular issues which you would like to consider as part of your forward work programme. There are some matters, though, that I was potentially giving some consideration to following some discussions with the chair, which haven't been included in your draft report at this stage, and they include the following. Looking specifically at the member-officer relationship, in that the Standards Committee recognised this is the linchpin of local government, and we could look at ways to further develop the member-officer protocol to ensure that ethical standards remain at the forefront of the relationship. We would look at how we could link in with our governance and audit committee within the council and develop ways in which we can work collaboratively on matters to enable assurances to be provided of ethical decision making and appropriate governance arrangements being in place. We can have some ongoing engagement with the national standards regime, which is being set up, of which our chair will now sit on when that meets twice a year, and looking to see how we can take some of the practice that's embedded in other authorities and implement it here in Neath Talbot. And I think picking up specifically as well what Councillor Peters was telling us at the start of the meeting, social media is certainly a matter that's given a lot of concern ultimately to members and the way in which they now operate. And we were going to suggest maybe a sort of project, whether it be through like a task and finish group or some sort of meeting, where we look at the training that's in place in respect of social media, how it can be improved, how we can link it in more into the standards regime, what can be done to support members in their use of social media platforms, with a key aim then of making sure that conducts and behaviour are being considered at the core usage of it, and it's not something that's ever going to be dealt with retrospectively or matters when complaints are made down the line. We're enshrining and embedding those principles for when that usage is ultimately taking place. And I think listening to the work of the group leaders over the course of the last year, it's certainly something that does cause some concern. So looking to see as a standards committee how we can build on that in due course, I think could be a very interesting programme. And I just end then with a few recommendations, picking up again on some of the issues that we've talked about over the past year, making sure that members attend annual refreshers in respect of training, asking group leaders if they can make sure that standards are a standing item on political meeting agendas, making sure people are completing declaration of gifts and hospitality, group leaders meeting with a monitoring officer to find out how we can do more to promote standards, how we can take steps to promote the member officer protocol. One of the points we picked up is how we can make sure that those wanting to stand for council, whether that be a county borough level or community council, are aware of some of the issues that they need to take on board. So looking how we can introduce some basic information sheets in those document packs that they get will be a key issue. And finally, then looking at more guidance ultimately that we can issue to all elected members. So that could be some key documents in respect of declarations of interest, predetermination, some case studies, and just some practical examples so we can help embed standards within the work of our county borough councillors and hopefully our community councillors as well. So a whistle-stop tour there, Chair, of what ultimately would be in the report. Happy to embed any more elements that the Standards Committee would like us to consider as part of its forward work programme in future priorities, but happy to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions or observations from members? Duncan. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Craig. Very useful report, I felt. Very well put together, very instructive, clear to understand. I just wonder whether we might encourage from either community or the borough council subgroups, the political groupings, their own case studies, things where they may feel they encounter dilemmas that they're not sure how to address. By all means, we can create case studies and use learning and development opportunities that we can draw on the Nolan principles and other fora in order to create a case study. But I think it's really helpful sometimes for those case studies to emerge bottom up, so to speak, And certainly in my work with Southwest Police, we found that when police officers and police administrators created the case study dilemmas themselves, the things that they were encountering on a day-to-day basis where they weren't sure how to tackle them, they took much greater ownership of the problem of standards rather than having something delivered to them from an outside agenda. So that's something I think we may wish to give some consideration to.
I think that is a great idea, Duncan, and I'd certainly welcome that. And I think we could look at this in a sort of two-pronged way, as well as approaching the group leaders to ask for their specific queries and areas that they would like guidance on. We have spoken about in the actual future priorities, bringing together a group of members, backbenchers, or from across the political divide to extend a standards committee in ways of trying to dispel some of the myths of what the standards committee is all about. We could use that as an appropriate forum to be able to get issues out of them, the type of things that they would like to see sort of further guidance on, and hopefully, as you said, get them to own that process a little bit more by bringing them into the equation when we have these discussions. So can certainly look to do that. I think it would be a great way in which to do it. To be honest, it may make my life easier as well. Instead of having to come up with various scenarios, they tell me what they would like advice on. So I would be very much for that.
Thanks, Duncan. That's really, really helpful. Sarah.
So you mentioned the Future Works programme, and it could be that I'm a newer councillor, so my understanding of what the Future Works programme is work that needs doing within the wards. I'm just wondering how standards would get involved with that in more detail, really.
What it's looking at, Councillor Thomas, is what the future work priorities of the Standards Committee ultimately would be. So it would be setting a forward work programme, so you know that over the 4 or 5 meetings that we'll be holding each year, the type of matters ultimately that will be included on the agendas and we'll be asking you to discuss. But as a way then as well of you trying to identify what you think would be of relevance ultimately for consideration, what we can do more ultimately to support on. So it's more about looking at the future work programme for the Standards Committee as opposed to any sort of generic county borough related matters, and how we can work collaboratively then to try and improve standards in any way that we can.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I think we've got a really interesting work programme ahead of us, and with those additional items that Craig has mentioned, yeah, I think there's a lot of work for us to do, but I'm sure we're all going to enjoy actually being engaged in the kind of work that's been proposed. So thank you. Any other questions, observations? No. Well, thank you, Craig. I thought it was an excellent report. Thank you very much for putting that together. And as Duncan said, and I'd just like to reiterate that, a very good read, very easy read, tells a story of what we've been doing and what we've achieved. So excellent. Thank you very much. Do we know when it will go to council, Craig?
Not at this stage. We'll be convening some dates in due course as part of the forward setting. We'll be aiming to take it as soon as we reasonably can.
And Craig, you've suggested that I attend council to present the report, and I'd really like to do that.
Very much so. I'll liaise with yourself, Chair, to agree some dates that this can happen.
Thank you very much. And may I have your approval for the report, please? Thank you. Thank you very much. So our next item is the local resolution procedure. Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm just bringing this to members so you can see ultimately the content of what the local resolution procedure ultimately actually entails. So you're aware that when a complaint is ultimately made from a councillor against another councillor, the Public Service Ombudsman recognises that perhaps one of the best ways to try to deal with it is to go through what is called the local resolution process, in the hope that maybe there could be some form of mediation ultimately between the parties, which could enable a matter to be put to bed without any sort of significant investigation work having to be undertaken by the Public Service Ombudsman as well. So each council and even town and community councils are encouraged now to adopt a protocol that could enable this type of matter to be dealt with without the need for intervention by further parties, and it's become known as the local resolution process. So in essence, what it would involve is that if a member has a complaint against another member and it's felt that this procedure could work. And an officer within the council, usually a corporate director, would be appointed to act as a mediator effectively between the parties to see if a solution can be identified, which could be an apology, it could be a letter acknowledging maybe that there'd been a breach of the code of conduct. It would be open to those parties to try and see if they could find a solution which would enable these matters ultimately to be dealt with. Sometimes mediation can work, and if it does, that would be absolutely great. If it doesn't, the local resolution process enables it to go to a different level, and as part of that, that would involve the appointment of a 3-panel person coming from 2 elected members from the County Borough Council and 1 independent member of the Standards Committee, in the hope then that maybe again some local resolution and informal processes can take place to try and resolve the dispute without further intervention again. It could work. If it does, fantastic. If it doesn't work, then it can be referred on to the Public Service Ombudsman in the usual process. And if they decide it needs to be investigated by the Standards Committee, they refer it back to us then for consideration. So I wanted to just bring a copy of this process to the Standards Committee today, just so you can note it and you can see the type of issues ultimately to consider. It's not something that is utilised on a regular basis. In the last couple of years, we haven't had any referrals ultimately to it. We have encouraged some members to consider it if they felt that this was an avenue that they wished to go down, but they've ultimately decided that it wasn't for them. Whether that in some cases has meant that they decided to go straight to the Ombudsman, it's always very difficult to say. But for the most part, the take-up of it has been very low. Which can be a good thing, I think, ultimately at times. It's because they realise that there are no complaints. It's not designed ultimately for significant accusations or significant complaints ultimately where it may be appropriate that it does need to go to the Public Service Ombudsman, but it's more that low-level ways of trying to see if we can resolve an individual dispute between 2 or more members in the hope then that it would negate any sort of significant investigatory time from the Public Service Ombudsman, and it's something that they actively promote local authorities considering. And it may be the case that if an individual makes a complaint to the Ombudsman, they may ask the question, have you engaged in the local resolution process? And if not, why not? Because they may consider that then as part of their basis as to whether they're going to investigate the complaint or not. So happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions or observations, please? Duncan?
Yeah, thank you very much again, Chair. It's just some of the terminology bothers me a little bit. On the top of page 53, Craig, of the papers we've been given, the reference is to informal mediation. I just wonder whether some consideration ought to be given to that, be termed as informal resolution, e.g. mediation, because mediation requires both parties to agree that they're willing to mediate. And it's almost then becomes part of a formal process when that agreement for mediation has been taken by both sides. So if you were to phrase it informal resolution, e.g. mediation, I think it's only a slight difference in the terminology, but I think it's an important one. As you rightly say, mediation has its place, and this, the basis of this is for low-level conflicts between individuals or groups of individuals. But I think I would just personally, anyway, I would favour the term informal resolution. But look, I appreciate if this is going to present challenges, it has to go through various committees for approval for the change of language, but something just to consider at least.
It's absolutely fine, no problem at all. We can make that change. There's no major issue. It's just an example, obviously, with some change of wording. We can adapt then as part of the next iteration of that document. I can easily make that change, no problem at all.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Duncan. Any other questions, observations? Thank you, Craig. Although, as you say, it hasn't been used very often. Nevertheless, I do think it's a really useful tool in resolving these low-level complaints. And as you say, if people looked at it and feel that actually they don't need to go for that, that is also a good thing, because they've recognised that perhaps the issue is something which can either be dropped or not taken any further. And so in a way, perhaps it does focus the minds as to the seriousness of the issue when the person is thinking about it. So a positive thing to have, even though it hasn't been used very much. So we must take that as a positive. Thank you. So we note that, and thank you very much for bringing it. And the next item is item 10, the independent review. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Beg your pardon. Item 9, disciplinary hearings.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a note and a document that's produced to members of the Standards Committee in the unlikely unfortunate event if we ever do have a matter that is referred to us ultimately by the Public Service Ombudsman for us to consider. It's effectively a protocol of the process that we will follow ultimately in order to hear a complaint or a referral that is ultimately made. And it's designed in a sort of two-stage approach, in that the first element, there would be a sort of an initial determination, effectively, whether you will consider it's something that as a standards committee you wish to take forward, or whether you feel that there's been no breach of the code of conduct, meaning it's not something that you will warrant investigation of. As part of that process, we would then set what would be a sort of directions timetable, which would enable the production of all of the various evidence streams that will be necessary as we take this case forward. And in essence, then it would involve us establishing a hearing, which would take place then to consider that matter. And it's covered very much like a sort of court hearing process, in the sense that you would have the evidence being submitted by the Public Service Ombudsman, along with any evidential basis that they wish to come forward with. The member in question would have an opportunity to put their case forward to explain why they felt that they were not in breach of the code of conduct, or there were any issues that they wish the Standards Committee to ultimately take into account. At the Standards Committee, you will then hear the matter, and once you have identified whether there has been a breach of the code of conduct, there would be a next part of the hearing process to agree a potential sanction that may need to be considered going forward. The protocol itself allows matters to be dealt with either via hearing in person or via written representations, and it's something that the Standards Committee and the County Borough Council can make a determination of as to whether they feel what would be the most appropriate forum ultimately for taking it forward. And there's an obligation then at the end of the process that a formal written decision will be prepared, which sets out what the decision of the Standards Committee ultimately would be. So no specific requirements ultimately stemming at this stage, but I just thought it helpful to bring to you. So we have an agreed protocol ultimately in place that should a complaint be referred to us, we are then in a position where we can deal with it expeditiously and move forward with it without us having to worry about certain processes or protocols that are necessary, Chair. But happy to answer any questions the members may have on it.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions from members? Alison.
Craig, it's an observation really about the hearing perhaps taking place on Teams, and I find myself wondering if it's me being a mental health nurse by background, is that sometimes some of the messages that are given there can be quite hard, and I just wonder what support is given to people if it's done via Teams rather than on a face-to-face. Just a concern.
I think you're absolutely right there, Alison. And it is one of these types of matters when they are dealing with via Teams, then it can be quite a sort of complex factor, simply being we can't offer any sort of physical support ultimately at the time. What we do when this happens, and we haven't had this position yet where we've done one virtually via Teams, so it will be a learning process for it, is whether there needs to be some sort of risk assessment work in respect of that individual to find out what more methods of support ultimately we can put in place to try and assist them, such as referral to our occupational health units and the different level of support that's available there. When it comes to a county borough council level as well, there are occasions where that county borough councillor can make an application to a fund for legal support during the course of the process as well, which is indemnified by the county borough council. So we would need to look at ways, obviously, how we can bring that to the attention of the individual members so they can have that network around them. But the way I would anticipate doing it is a sort of risk assessment based, where we look to see what support could be provided. Are there any issues which specifically need to be addressed? I would always actively encourage members or to come in person ultimately for these matters. So I think teams can remove the impersonal element of it. So having a person here and we can liaise with them would be much more supportive in my view, but we can cross that bridge hopefully when we get to it.
I agree, Craig. I think that sometimes COVID did us favours in many ways, but in other ways there's lots of things that didn't do us favours, and I that's just my concern about that support for that individual. Thank you.
Also, Craig, you're absolutely right, Alison. I do support you in that, and just reflecting on our experiences as magistrates when we had proceedings over the video link. It's quite difficult to conduct those kinds of sensitive issues over video. And also, I think having somebody present in a room is quite different in terms of behaviours and how you engage with people. And given, you know, that they are likely to be sensitive issues, perhaps we, in the process, although I recognise it is a good option to have if somebody can't, to actually dissuade people from taking part in these kind of proceedings over a video link. And it does take away, and it's difficult to judge the situation that the person is in too. You know, they might be in their own home, but you don't know who else is there, for example. You don't know how, you know, you can't read their body language the same, and all those kind of issues. So it is, you know, we need to temper it by judgment calls, really, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, Craig, just having a risk assessment would satisfy that as well with the individual. Thank you.
Craig, sorry, if I can just come in on that. I know within the police service, there's a facility for whoever's being investigated or may be coming under sanction to have a friend present with them. I don't know whether that can be considered.
Indeed, I don't know whether it's actually in there, but I can certainly look to add it. They have an opportunity if they wish to bring anyone with them for moral support. That is absolutely fine as part of that process. I do encourage, if it's a county borough councillor, for them to take advantage of the opportunity for that legal advice, given the consequences ultimately that it could bring. That opportunity isn't afforded to town and community councillors, I would add, but if they feel that they want somebody with them for support as part of that process, then that's absolutely fine then as well.
Thank you, Tom. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. So sorry, Sarah.
So just coming back in on that, so with the community councillors, if they were a member of a union, for example, would they be able to bring a representative in that capacity?
Yes, I believe they would, in the sense that if they have somebody who is representing them as part of this process, and that's the way in which they wish to embark on their conducting of the hearing, that would be absolutely fine, in my view.
Brilliant, thank you.
So a query then from me, Craig, following up on Sarah's question, would that person be an advocate for them, or would they be a supporter?
They are actually entitled, if they wish to appoint an advocate to actually represent them during the course of the hearing, they are more than capable of doing that if that's the particular arrangement they have. If they just want somebody to have as moral support, that would absolutely be fine as well. It depends on the individual circumstances about which way they wish to take part in the hearing.
Thank you. So we are to approve the procedure for the conduct of disciplinary hearings. Do I have committee's approval for it, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. And our final item, the independent review.
Thank you very much, Chair. So during the course of the last 18 months, there have been some reports brought to the Standards Committee about the work that Professor Richard Penn has been undertaking in respect of a review of standards functions, ultimately in Wales. And back last year, he produced his outline Penn report, which identified ways in where various improvements ultimately could be made as part of the standards regime. To enable some of those changes ultimately to be made, it would need to be legislated on by Welsh Government. So Welsh Government have been considering those comments that have been received over the course of the last year and engaging in various forums, such as with the Public Service Ombudsman for Wales, the Adjudication Panel, the Society of Monitoring Officers throughout Wales then as well. And they've now produced their response ultimately to the Pen Review and set out some areas ultimately where they feel that it could look at in that regard. So the review itself concluded the current framework was in fact fit for purpose and worked well in practice. It suggested a few amendments could lead to a greater emphasis in the framework on prevention of complaints, improving handling complaints, and hopefully result in the already high ethical standards being further enhanced. So Welsh Government have now issued a consultation document where they asked a series of questions, ultimately in respect of the response that they wish to make and whether these would be supported ultimately by authorities and any sort of other appropriate organisations. And Appendix 1 of your report item 10 includes those questions and what a proposed response ultimately could be from the Standards Committee. And it's designed to cover a wide variety of factors. And I think my view ultimately, as I've been looking at them, they are very reasonable, what Welsh Government are ultimately suggesting. There's nothing there which caused me any sort of immediate concerns from a legal perspective, or perhaps more from an ethical or governance perspective, and the impact it could have then on county borough councils. So the response ultimately that's been prepared is included at Appendix 1, hopefully for the Standards Committee ultimately to agree and adopt today, whereupon I'll return it to Welsh Government, but happy to make any amendments or to address any different aspects that the Standards Committee would like me to take forward, Chair.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you for putting together the response, which I thought was excellent and very comprehensive and very thorough. So thank you for that. And I thought there were some very positive things in terms of the changes. So, you know, for example, the bar on eligibility for Standards Committee, that seems eminently reasonable, rather than a bar for life, for example, for elected members, that actually it's a period of time before they can stand as independent members. So the changes are, I think, very constructive and very positive. So I open this up to any questions or observations from the committee on the response from the council. No? Oh, yes. Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate really what you stated and the content of the response. Can I just check one question, Craig, if I may? In terms of the opportunity to respond individually on the consultation questions that were put out, are you looking for responses from the individual members of the Standards Committee, or is it a collective response as indicated?
We would usually do a collective response from the Standards Committee, which would be then funneled through myself, but there's nothing stopping individual members. If you wish to respond in your own right to any particular aspect, you are of course more than welcome to do so, and I can forward the link that's on the Welsh Government website. But our standard process in the past is we do a collective response on part of the Standards Committee. Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. It would have been my approach as well. You know, sometimes you may have differences of opinion between the members of the committee, and you know, the overall collective decision would be the one that goes forward. I found it fascinating to read and to consider all the questions that have been put forward for consultation. And yes, happy to endorse the work that you've done and that you intend to put forward. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Duncan. Nobody else. Duncan. Yeah. Right. If there's no other questions, is the committee happy to approve the council's response? Yes. Thank you. Or rather, it's the Standards Committee response on behalf of the council, to get that correct. Thank you again, Craig. Excellent response. Thank you. And then we have any urgent items? Craig, I believe we've none. So that concludes the meeting. So thank you all very much indeed for your very helpful and constructive contribution to the committee's proceedings. It's been a very enjoyable meeting. And Craig, thank you for an excellent set of papers. Thank you.
Thanks all. Diolch pawb.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.